The Climate Action Reserve is the most experienced and trusted offset registry to serve the carbon markets. As more organizations look to combat climate change and support environmental projects with true integrity, they turn to the reserve to foster real solutions and reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Through Carbon Connection, the Reserve's in-house experts will explore our high-quality standards for carbon offset projects and discuss climate change practices that benefit economies, ecosystems, and society. Thank you for joining. Hi, my name is Lauren Wilson, and welcome to our next episode of Carbon Connection, hosted by Climate Action Reserve. Today, we are going back to the basics as I introduce a few key terms and topics critical to the Reserve's programming as well as the carbon market. In this episode, I will be covering additionality, which is key to Climate Action Reserve offsets. Thanks for joining. When it comes to offsets, additionality means above business as usual. In other words, an offset project would not have happened in a usual business situation and without the financial support of the carbon market. With additionality, there are several approaches to how it may be determined. Within existing carbon offset programs, there are two basic approaches to determining additionality. The first is project-specific, and the second is standardized. The Reserve applies a standardized approach to determining additionality, where performance standards and other conditions or criteria that projects must meet in order to be considered additional are determined by the Reserve. These standards and criteria are established separately for each project type and are designed to exclude non-additional or business as usual projects from eligibility. In all cases, projects that are required by law or regulation are excluded. Other criteria and conditions are specified in each protocol. From a regulatory perspective, standardized performance-based additionality tests are advantageous in that they are less subjective and administratively easier to implement than project-specific tests. Additionally, they can reduce transaction costs for project developers, alleviate uncertainties for investors, and increase the transparency and consistency of regulatory decisions. The Reserve incorporates standard additionality tests in all of its protocols. These tests generally have two components, a legal requirement test and a performance standard test. A legal requirement test ensures that eligible projects and/or the greenhouse gas reductions they achieve would not have occurred anyway in order to comply with federal, state, or local regulations, or other legally binding mandates. A project passes the legal requirement test when there are no laws, statutes, regulations, court orders, environmental mitigation agreements, permitting conditions, or other legally binding mandates requiring its implementation, or requiring the implementation of similar measures that would achieve equivalent levels of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. For the performance standard test, projects that are not legally required may still be non-additional if they would have been implemented for other reasons. For example, because they are attractive investments, irrespective of carbon offset revenues. Performance standard tests are intended to screen out this potential set of projects. Projects that pass a performance standard test should be those that, in the absence of a carbon offset market, would have insufficient financial returns or would face other types of insurmountable implementation barriers. In Reserve protocols, performance standards may be specified in several ways. They can be specified through emission rate thresholds. For some project types, a performance standard may be specified in terms of a rate of greenhouse gas emissions, usually per unit of production of some product or service. For example, tons of CO2 per megawatt per hour. Generally, the threshold rate would be based on a level of performance that is significantly better than average for the industry or sector. Projects that have lower emission rates than the threshold, for example, would be considered additional. There are also practice or technology-based thresholds. Performance standards may also be specified in terms of a specific practice or technology that is rarely or never implemented in the absence of a carbon offset market. Such standards are generally based on surveys of the market penetration rates of candidate practices or technologies. Projects employing a qualifying technology or practice are automatically considered additional. There are a few other qualifying conditions or criteria as well. Performance standards may also incorporate or be based on other specific qualifying conditions that a project must meet in order to be considered eligible. Conditions may include characteristics related to the project site, specifications for a particular eligible technology or practice, or other contextual factors. Projects meeting the conditions would be considered additional. That's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for tuning in to learn more about additionality, and I hope I've added more knowledge to your repertoire. Tune in next week to learn more about Climate Action Reserve and our programming.